when I started reporting on the migration crisis in Panama, down in the Darien Gap, was about 2012 or so. And it was more drugs then than it was people. Back then, 30 or 40 people a month coming through there was a big deal. Big deal. I went down in 2012. I remember very specifically because it was the day my dad died. I was down there in the jungle, embedded with the Center Front, the border police here in Panama, making a documentary about them, and got a call from my mom in a place where there wasn't any cell phone service, which is a miracle. And I answered, my phone rang, and I went, "What?" And I answered the phone. And my mom said, the first thing she said, "My friend and I were just on our knees praying that this call would go through." And I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "Your father just passed away suddenly." And so I said, "I'll be right there." And I hung up, went to the commander of the Center Front guys and said, "Comandante, I'm really sorry, but I've got to go. My father just passed away." I had some tears in my eyes. And he looked at one of his lieutenants and said, "Get this guy on the next flight to the United States." At that time, it was about a 3-hour drive to the airport. We made it in an hour and a half. I thought we were going to have a double funeral. He was driving like crazy to get us there. But he got me there. I got on a flight and I made it home that evening. Dirty, nasty, hadn't showered in 2 days, muddy, sweaty, smelled terrible, sitting in first class because my company was nice enough to get me a first class ticket. It was a surreal moment. But I remember very vividly. It was August 16th, 2012 when that happened. So I was reporting down there since then. By 2017, it was mostly Cubans, some Colombians, Venezuelans, and some Haitians, I guess, were coming through at that time. And at that point, it was up to maybe 130, 150, 160 a month. That was huge. I mean, it was like unbelievable. That was like a year's worth from before. Well, then it just kept going up and kept going up and kept going up. And by the time Joe Biden threw open the floodgates when he took office in 2021, the numbers just skyrocketed. And at that time, Panama had proven that they could close the Darien Gap if they wanted to, because when the sickness hit in 2020, 2021, Panama locked everything down, everything just locked down. And they closed the airports, closed the borders, everything, locked everybody in their homes. It was house arrest, terrible. Panama had one of the worst lockdowns of any place in the world. And they said, "Oh, it'll just be 15 days, no big deal." And it ended up staying that way for 10 and a half months. Now, I was stuck here for about 11 weeks, and then we finally called the embassy and said, "Get us out. We can't do this." And they laid on a emergency humanitarian flight back to the States and got us back to the land of the free and the home of the brave. And in West Virginia, you wouldn't have known there was a sickness because everybody just treated it like the actual sickness it was. And here in Panama, what they said was, if you come during that time, if you come into Panama illegally through the Darien Gap, you're going to stay in the Darien Gap in a camp out in the jungle until this sickness is over, as long as that takes. And they were there for about a year. There were babies born in the mud in that camp. It was terrible. It was finally they started rioting, literally rioting and burning stuff down because they didn't want to stay there anymore. I can't blame them there. And as soon as they just said everybody has to stay there until the sickness is over, everybody quit coming because nobody wanted to live there. How about that? So I've been saying ever since then that all Panama has to do if they really want to close the Darien Gap is just say, if you come into our country illegally, we got this camp down the Darien Gap, you're going to live in that camp for at least 12 months. And then we'll think about letting you go. And, oh, by the way, if you bring a child through, because so many people brought little babies and little ones through there, I mean, that's the worst kind of neglect. So Panama should have said, if you bring a child through there, that is child abuse. You will be arrested and you will go to jail for 5 years. That would have ended it. But they didn't do that. You see, Alejandro Mayorkas, the Secretary of Homeland Security, came down here several times. And his stated purpose when he came here during the Biden administration was not to stop the migration through the Darien Gap. By his own admission, as he would give speeches about this, his intent coming down here was to make the traverse through the Darien Gap, which was at one point killing about 10% of everyone who tried it. 10 out of every 100 people wouldn't come out again on the other side. They had 30 or 40 babies every year that would either walk out on their own or get carried out by somebody who didn't know who they were because their parent died of exposure in the gap. Baby didn't have any documents. Baby couldn't speak yet, couldn't tell you its name. They didn't know what these babies' names were. They didn't know what country they were from. They were just lost children. When they started getting these kids in here and they didn't have any idea where they should be or what country they were from or what their names were, they would stick them in a hotel or a hospital or something for several months and put ads in the paper and try to put out the word, hey, help us figure out whose kids these are. And if nobody came forward, they would just name them Juan and put them in school. They don't have a system here for kids like that. So if there's no family, there is one, as far as I know, one orphanage in Panama that's run by some friends of ours. And that's it. That's all they have. So just imagine how crazy it is that my daughter was asking me if they were able to close the Darien Gap and stop the people from coming through illegally by just announcing that they had to get deported or stay in this camp in the Darien. Why didn't they do that 4 years ago? And I said, because Alejandro Mayorkas did not want the Darien Gap to be closed. We are starting to learn, starting to understand even more just how much the Biden administration actually wanted this irregular migration. They wanted it. They planned on it. We've been saying this all along, but I mean, the proof is in the pudding now. I mean, we have so much proof. All this time, we were getting this runaround from the Biden administration that, oh gosh, we're doing all we can. We can't help it. We're making progress. No, they weren't. They were intentionally cranking it up to 11 on the illegal immigration. During the election cycle, Kamala Harris kept getting asked about illegal immigration, and she kept saying, well, it's the fault of the Senate. If the Senate would pass this bill, if this bill had not been blocked by Senate Republicans that allowed 1.8 million migrants a year into the United States, and then we would crack down on it and slow it down a little bit. That was her idea. That was what Kamala Harris's big plan was. She was trying to blame it on Senate Republicans. Well, guess what? Here we are, and it's closed. It's done. Game over. Alejandro Mayorkas set up centers all across Latin America, in Guatemala and Colombia and everywhere, where migrants could go and get their appointment done at that center for their asylum claim. I put those in scare quotes because, as you've heard me say many times, that they had no claim of asylum. They were all economic migrants, everyone. And they set up these centers to do their preliminary asylum hearing, give them temporary status in the United States, put them on an airplane and fly them into the heartland of America so that they didn't show up in the numbers of people getting picked up by Border Patrol along the border. And then the Biden administration tried to claim that the numbers of irregular crossings was going down. They're trying to say, yes, we've done a great job. Look, the number of crossings is going down along the border. The number of illegals getting picked up by Border Patrol is going down. Yeah, it's going down because you're flying them in directly from Latin America, from Nicaragua and Guatemala and Colombia. When Mayorkas came to Panama, he did the same thing. He said, we've got to make it less expensive, safer, and faster for these people to get through the Darien Gap because 10% of the people that go in don't come out again. That's terrible. All these people are dying. We got to fix this. Yeah, the way to fix it would be to close it. Just close it. All it took was the will to close it, and it's closed. For the last couple of months, the people who were making millions of dollars a year on all the migration coming through Latin America were out of work. They were really suffering, poor guys. They weren't making money anymore because there weren't any migrants coming. But now they're starting to make money again because the migrants are turning around and going back south. Now, not in such numbers. Many of the migrants made it into the United States and are still there. Many of the migrants that didn't make it into the United States ended up in Mexico and have decided to stay there and try to work and make a living somehow. We talked to some of those when we were there in Tijuana a couple weeks ago. But many of them are starting to say, well, if I can't get into the United States, well, then I'm just going to go back to where I was before I left. And it's not their home country. They're not going back to Venezuela. They're not going back to Guatemala, by and large. Some are, but most aren't. They're not going back to Cuba or Haiti unless they're being forced to by getting flown back there by the United States or something. They're going back to the countries that they were living in before the Biden administration took office. This is what so many people don't get this. All these migrants that were coming that are Cuban, Venezuelan, Haitian, they weren't coming from Cuba, Venezuela, and Haiti. They were from Brazil, Ecuador, Chile, Bolivia, Peru, countries like that. Because they had left their home countries in Cuba and Haiti and Venezuela years ago, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, before the Biden administration took office. And they rebuilt their lives, got jobs, and were surviving just fine in Ecuador, Chile, Peru, etc. I know many of them personally. I met those migrants. They're just economic migrants. They were never asylum seekers. If they were asylum seekers, then the Haitians would have become residents of Guyana, because that's the first place they typically go when they leave Haiti. And Guyana certainly is not persecuting Haitian migrants. The Venezuelans would have become asylum seekers in Colombia. Many of them did. They wouldn't have gone all the way to the United States.